switch over to the Saturn itself. I have a lot of people asking me more about the Sega Saturn. The Sega Saturn, the console itself, originally it was supposed to be a 2D console. This has something to do with kind of its fate and the reason it was kind of a flop. Now, when Sony announced that they were going to go ahead with their PlayStation without Nintendo's help, they revealed it was going to have a heavy focus on 3D graphics. Now, after Sony showed their hand that they were going to be making their console pure 3D, Sega scrambled to make the Saturn 3D capable. This is kind of where its downfall is. I mean, the thing had 6 processors. It was a nightmare to develop for. The architecture was almost impossible for the early developers to understand. Making some of those first Sega Saturn games just look terrible in 3D. Basically Frankenstein together some 3D chips. When it was all said and done, the Sega Saturn had dual CPU architecture. And actually, I meant to say 8 processors. It had 8 processors.
People, this is not a test. We are at DEFCON 5. Alpha Sector. Check. Tango Sector. Check. Delta Sector.
Only Sega Saturn has 3 32-bit processors.
Delta Sector.
3 processors mean better gameplay.
Delta Sector, you hear me?
Sony PlayStation only has 1.
3, 2, 1.
When you've got Sega Saturn, nothing else matters.
You know, the architecture was a mess and supremely hard for you to develop for. Had a big learning curve, and the dev kits, all that stuff, just a nightmare. To add to their bad choices, there were some very baffling decisions made on the American side for the North American launch of the Sega Saturn. In March 1995, the president of Sega America, Tom Kalinske, announced that the Sega Saturn would be released on Saturn Day, which is going to be September 2nd, 1995. So they were aiming for like a fall release right before Christmas. However, the higher-ups in Japan wanted to push the Saturn out to beat the PlayStation's release window. So, at the world's first E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, on May 11th, 1995, Mr. Kalinske got on stage. Everybody was super stoked at this E3, you know? Everyone wanted to try out Sega's new hardware before its release that September. But Tom Kalinske had some other plans. He dropped a tactile nuclear bomb on everyone in attendance at that first E3. When he got up, he said, and I quote, "Due to high consumer demand, we have shipped the consoles already and they're on their way to 3 big American retailers." And this also was including Toys R Us and a few others. What this did is it infuriated retailers on both sides. Some of the retailers weren't expecting this release that soon, so it infuriated them. They didn't have room on their store shelves. It came unexpected. If you ever worked in retail, you know, stocking the shelves and everything's kind of planned out, really infuriated those guys. On the other end were the people that didn't receive the Sega Saturn. They were also furious. KB Toy Store decided, since they didn't receive any of the product with that initial surprise release date, they never carried it. KB Toy Store was a toy store in almost every mall. It was a staple of my childhood. Anytime I went to the mall with my mom, the main reason I wanted to go was to go to KB Toy Store. So that was huge. KB Toy Store ended up being destroyed by Mitt Romney and his Bain Capital Group after they loaded a bunch of debt on it later on. But back in the 90s, it was huge. I don't remember a mall ever that didn't have a KB Toy Store in the 90s. Anywhere we traveled with my parents on road trips, I would always want to go to the mall to go into KB. Now, on top of all these terrible decisions, the Sega Saturn released with only 4 launch titles and no third-party offering. All the launch titles were produced by Sega, and this is, you know, these were some of the first generation on this really hard to develop hardware. If you take a look, Virtua Fighter, that was one of the release titles, and you take a look at Virtua Fighter 2 after they actually got the hang of the console, the differences are night and day. It looked like crap over here, and it looked amazing over here. It had such a high learning curve to figure out how to develop for this console. Eventually, the developers, they began to learn the hardware and were able to produce some pretty amazing looking games. Now, the Sega Saturn ended up being one of my favorite systems of all time. I think it kind of goes to show in those final days of Sega being in the console war, they really tried to get some quality titles out there to, you know, bring attention to themselves. It wasn't like a Wii or, you know, kind of like the Genesis where they had all these thousands and thousands, hundreds of millions of installed consoles in people's houses where they could just throw out shovelware. They had to be careful on what games that they released, and they wanted them to be high quality. Saturn also ended up having some pretty terrible ad campaigns in the United States. This was the late 90s. This was the time of the Tude era. Being obnoxious and crude, you know, that was in style in the late 90s. The late 90s brought us Marilyn Manson, Limp Bizkit, Korn, Insane Clown Posse, Celebrity Deathmatch, South Park, WWF Attitude Era, NWO, all those other wrestling things. Saturn had a series of shock campaigns. They were very heavy in the sexual innuendo when you look through the magazines of the day. Just check out some of these ad campaigns. Yeah. Whoa. What the f? Unfortunately, these silly ad campaigns were very unsuccessful in the United States. Over in Japan, the Sega Saturn was actually a success, and they had a very successful ad campaign starring Sagato Sanshiro, which was a company mascot. He was just this really intense guy with an amazing head of hair that would Sega Saturn! He'd put the Sega Saturn in the kid's face. Now, what I want to mention here, one of the most famous, or should I say infamous ad campaigns of the Sega Saturn, came towards the end of the console's life cycle in the United States. This ad campaign was for a game called Panzer Dragoon Saga. Saga was held at the time as one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Some critics and reviewers even went as far as to proclaim this was the Final Fantasy VII of the Sega Saturn console. Panzer Dragoon Saga was severely underproduced for North America. The people in the higher-ups at Sega were getting ready to pull the plug on it. They didn't produce hardly any copies. It was so underproduced, Sega decided instead of to make more, which would make sense, they decided to troll their own customers. They took out a full-page ad at the back of all of the biggest video game magazines, not to spread awareness about Panzer Dragoon Saga, but to troll the public who couldn't get their hands on a copy. You can't make this shit up. They had a cutout mask on the back, and it told the players, if you can't find our game, just cut out this mask. You can go in your backyard or around the neighborhood and pretend that you're playing Panzer Dragoon Saga. What? Really? You guys really trolled people like that? How many bad decisions were you guys making? You're so stupid. I love you, Sega, but f you. Now, Tom Kalinske was the acting president of Sega of America. He was kind of getting tired of it. He was getting sick of all the bad choices and the missteps, and Japan not really listening to him. He knew the Saturn was a good console. He just had to learn the architecture. But a lot of the corporate missteps, a lot of the decisions that were made by the higher-ups, it was really kind of just turning him off the video game industry as a whole. Is this mine?
Yeah.
Thanks. No sugar.
No sugar.
Not even like one. Then, along came the man who killed the Sega Saturn. Bernard Stoller, or as known to people in the video game industry, Bernie Stoller, whose resume included president of the Atari Lynx division. You guys may remember the Atari Lynx as a pretty cool gaming console. I mean, it ate up batteries faster than the Game Gear, but it was full color and you could play it left-handed, or you could flip it and play it right-handed. I got one on a trade in like 1998, so I came kind of late to the Atari Lynx game. Zybots, that's a cool game. After Atari, he became vice president of Sony's Computer Entertainment Division, where he infamously said, American gamers don't understand 2D Japanese RPGs, which may have been part of the reason he got canned from Sony. What made Sega think it was a good idea to hire Bernie Stoller? We'll never know, but he does end up redeeming himself. Bernie came along with a plan to effectively kill the Sega Saturn. He wanted to get rid of it right from the get-go. In 1997, when he took over, he famously stated that the Sega Saturn was not Sega's future. He also went on to say outrageous things that, you know, you shouldn't say when you're working with a company, like the Sega Saturn was poorly designed, which may have been true, but who says that if you work for the company. He stuck to the plan of killing the Saturn, and only 12 games were released in North America in 1998. Magic Knight Ray Earth being the final North American release for the Sega Saturn. Compared to 1996, where 119 different games were released for the Saturn console. Now, the Saturn was gone. Bernie Stoller killed it. But from the ashes, a phoenix was going to rise. And Bernie Stoller, even though he really made a lot of Sega fans angry, was about to redeem himself. Out of the ashes of the Saturn came a console that is universally regarded as one of the greatest consoles of all time. Bernie Stoller would lead the charge.
Blunderers! Fools! We possess games greater than any on Earth, yet our market shares are stripped from us on every front. Our most dangerous enemy is not PlayStation or Nintendo, but our own collective incompetence.
Hogwash!
What? You dare say?
The fault, most imperial president of Sega Japan, lies not within us, but within you! Your marketing has been pompous, premature, and overall pathetic!
It's combative, that's treason. I don't believe it. Yes, marketing is at the very heart of this matter. But it is not my decisions that are in question, Sega of America President Tom Kalinske. It is yours! Your early release of the Saturn has driven our victory to catastrophe for the last time!
Go ahead. Make me the scapegoat. My loyal American retailers and game developers can testify to my superb stewardship of Sega. But you don't have the balls to let them speak!
Wrong again! Defend him if you can!
Indeed they shall. You first, noble KB Toy Store.
Retail speaking, it is only fair to say that Tom Kalinske is a world-class buffoon.
What? Capcom, Konami, Brave, Eidos, and Interplay. You won't let KB Toy Store's treacherous assassination of my character go unchallenged, will you?
Certainly not! KB forgot to mention your, how should we say, 32X.
Oh.
What happened to the good old days, like our Genesis does what Nintendo don't campaign?
We supported you, but you couldn't even fill our order.
Your meddling brought us defeat, again and again and again.
You're not just a fool, you're Sega's curse! Insufficient! Inexcusable!
Releasing the Sega Saturn early should have worked. Why? Why? Why?
Intruder alert, Sector 45A! Battle stations!
Look, Bernie Stoller has broken in.
This may be a corporate espionage attempt. The president must stay here. We will intercept Bernie Stoller.
I will meet Bernie Stoller, head on!
No! We must protect you!
Without you, there is no Sega!
Yes, yes. If something were to happen to him, it would be tragic, wouldn't it? We shall stop this assassin. Come, follow me. Sega! Bernie Stoller didn't go this way. He went that way.
Bernie Stoller approaching the president's boardroom. Seal all sectors.
None may challenge the Emperor of Sega. This I command. Well, that won't be necessary. I have seen you before. At Atari. At Sony. In a vision, great Hayao Nakayama. I believe I begin my tenure here at Sega starting now. I am Bernie Stoller, and now it's time for you to fulfill your destiny. Behold the Sega Dreamcast.
Ugh.